The Mississippi River, 1878. A woman stands alone on a weathered dock, her belongings stacked in a small pile beside her. The riverboat that brought her here disappears around the bend, its captain, her husband, having left her with nothing but a hastily scribbled note and a handful of coins. As the sound of the paddle wheel fades into the distance, she wonders how her life led to this moment of utter betrayal. What she doesn't yet know is that this abandonment, cruel as it is, will open the door to an unexpected journey, one where she'll discover her own resilience and a different kind of respect from the most unlikely source. A Comanche horse trader, whose quiet dignity will change her understanding of what it means to be valued. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra, special for you. The morning had begun like any other for Eleanor Mitchell. She had risen before dawn to prepare breakfast for her husband Thomas, who captained the riverboat Meridian's Fortune. Their marriage of 7 years had weathered its share of storms. Thomas's volatile temper, his extended absences along the river routes, and lately his increasing coldness. But Eleanor remained steadfast, believing that patience would eventually soften the hard edges of the man she had once fallen in love with. They had stopped at Port Haven, a small but bustling trading post along the Mississippi, where Thomas needed to negotiate cargo contracts for the journey north. Eleanor had been delighted at the prospect of stretching her legs on solid ground after weeks confined to the narrow corridors of the riverboat. She had dressed carefully in her blue calico dress with ivory buttons, the nicest of her travel clothes, and pinned her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant style that Thomas had once complimented. "I'll be meeting with Harrison and his associates," Thomas had informed her over breakfast, not looking up from his papers. "Business talk? You'd find it dreadfully boring." Eleanor nodded, accustomed to his dismissals. "Perhaps I could visit the general store. I heard they receive fabric shipments from as far as New York." Thomas grunted non-committally, then checked his pocket watch. "Be back by noon. I won't tolerate delays in our departure schedule." As Eleanor stepped onto the weathered planks of the dock, she breathed deeply, savoring the earthy smells of the riverside settlement. Port Haven was a patchwork of wooden structures, warehouses, merchants' shops, and humble dwellings that served the river trade. It wasn't grand by any measure, but after weeks on the water, it felt expansive and full of possibility. She spent a pleasant morning browsing the general store's modest selection of fabrics, purchasing some thread and buttons she needed for mending, and even treating herself to a ribbon of deep burgundy silk that reminded her of the color Thomas had given her during their courtship. The shopkeeper's wife, a friendly woman named Martha Lewis, invited Eleanor to take tea with her in the back room. "It must be something living on the river," Martha remarked, pouring steaming liquid into chipped porcelain cups. Seeing all those different places, Eleanor smiled politely. "It has its charms, though I admit I sometimes long for a proper garden and neighbors who don't change with every port." "And Captain Mitchell? He's well respected on the river, from what my husband says. Drives a hard bargain but runs a tight ship." "Yes," Eleanor replied, the word hanging between them like river mist. She didn't elaborate on how Thomas's reputation for discipline extended to their private quarters, or how his respect from others never seemed to translate to respect for her. At 12:45, Eleanor gathered her purchases and bid Martha goodbye. She wanted to be punctual. Thomas's mood darkened considerably when she gave him any reason for complaint. As she approached the dock where the Meridian's Fortune had been moored, she slowed her steps, confusion creeping over her. The riverboat was gone. Eleanor stood frozen, her parcels clutched against her chest, certain there must be some mistake. Perhaps Thomas had moved the boat to another mooring. But a quick scan up and down the riverfront confirmed what she didn't want to believe. The distinctive silhouette of the Meridian's fortune was nowhere to be seen. "You looking for the Mitchell boat, ma'am?" A dock worker approached. "Cap in hand." "Yes," Eleanor managed, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Do you know where it's gone?" The man shifted uncomfortably. "Pulled out about an hour ago, headed north." He hesitated, then added, "Captain said to give you this, if you came asking." He extended a folded piece of paper and a small leather pouch that clinked with the unmistakable sound of coins. Eleanor took them with numb fingers. The dock worker, sensing the delicacy of the situation, murmured something about getting back to work and retreated, leaving Eleanor alone with the devastating evidence of her abandonment. With trembling hands, she unfolded the note. Thomas's bold, slashing handwriting cut across the page. "Eleanor, our arrangement has run its course. I've taken on a new opportunity that requires my undivided attention. You'll find enough money to secure lodging and passage back to your sister. In St. Louis, it's better this way, Captain T. Mitchell." The words blurred as tears welled in Eleanor's eyes. 7 years of marriage was dismissed as an arrangement. No explanation, no true goodbye, just cold, efficient abandonment, like cargo deemed too burdensome to carry further. The pouch contained $28, enough for a few weeks of modest lodging and perhaps passage on another boat, but little more. Eleanor stood on the dock, the Mississippi flowing endlessly past her, carrying everything she had known downstream and out of reach. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Another voice intruded on her shock, a woman this time, older, with a weathered face and kind eyes. She wore the practical clothes of a boarding house keeper. "You look like you could use a place to sit down." Eleanor blinked away tears, straightening her shoulders with the ingrained dignity that had been her companion through years of Thomas's subtle cruelties. "My husband. It seems he's continued his journey without me." The woman's face registered, understanding without surprise, as if she'd seen this particular scene play out before, on these very docks. "I'm Harriet Walsh. I run the River's Rest boarding house just up the hill. Why don't you come along and have something to eat while you sort things out?" With no better option presenting itself, Eleanor gathered her meager possessions and followed Harriet up the sloping dirt road that led away from the river. The boarding house was a 2-story wooden structure, plain but well-maintained, with a deep porch and climbing roses that softened its utilitarian design. Inside, Harriet settled Eleanor at a table in the empty dining room and disappeared into the kitchen, returning minutes later with a bowl of stew and fresh bread. "Eat first," she advised. "Troubles don't seem quite so overwhelming on a full stomach." As Eleanor mechanically spooned the stew, Harriet gently extracted her story. When she finished, the older woman nodded thoughtfully. "Captain Mitchell," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "He's known in these parts. Not the first time he's left someone at port, though usually it's crew members who've crossed him, not—" She trailed off, apparently thinking better of finishing. "The thought. Not his wife," Eleanor completed flatly. The initial shock was fading, leaving a hollow space where 7 years of misplaced loyalty had resided. "What am I to do now, Mrs. Walsh?" "Harriet, please. And as for what to do, Port Haven may not look like much, but we take care of our own, and anyone who washes up on our shores becomes one of us until they decide otherwise. You can stay here while you figure things out." That night, in a small but clean room on the 2nd floor of the River's Rest, Eleanor sat at the window, watching the Mississippi flow past, carrying paddle-wheelers and flatboats on its broad back. Thomas was out there somewhere, probably relieved to be unburdened of her presence. Perhaps there was another woman. There had been rumors before, whispers among the riverboat wives, that Eleanor had stubbornly ignored. Or perhaps he simply hadn't wanted her anymore, finding her presence an inconvenience to his ambitions. As she unpacked her single carpet bag, the only luggage she'd taken for what was supposed to be a brief shore excursion, Eleanor found a small, leather-bound, journal Thomas had given her in the early days of their marriage. She opened it to find pages of her own careful handwriting chronicling their river journeys, interspersed with pressed flowers and sketches of river scenes. The entries grew shorter over the years, the tone shifting from excitement to resignation. The last entry, dated 3 weeks earlier, read simply, "Thomas barely speaks to me now except to criticize. I wonder if he remembers why he married me at all." Eleanor picked up a pencil and wrote a new entry, April 17th, 1878. "Thomas has abandoned me at Port Haven. I am alone, but perhaps that is preferable to being invisible in plain sight." The next morning, after a restless night, Eleanor came downstairs to find Harriet in conversation with a tall, broad-shouldered man in the entrance hall. He turned as she descended the stairs, and Eleanor was struck by his appearance, not conventionally handsome, but possessed of a quiet dignity that commanded attention. His skin was deeply tanned from years under the sun, and his black hair, streaked with silver at the temples, was tied back with a simple leather cord. He wore the practical clothes of a trader, sturdy trousers, a cotton shirt, and a leather vest. But something in his bearing set him apart. "Ah, Eleanor," Harriet called, "come meet Daniel Swifthorse. He brings the finest horses to our humble port from Western Territories." "Ma'am," the man said with a slight nod, his voice deep and measured. His dark eyes held Eleanor's for a moment, not intrusive, but assessing. "Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story." "Mr. Swifthorse," Eleanor acknowledged, automatically adopting the formal manners that had been drilled into her since childhood. "Just Daniel," he corrected mildly. "I was explaining to Mrs. Walsh that I'm looking for someone to help with accounts and correspondence. My business has grown beyond what I can manage alone," Harriet beamed. "And I was just telling Daniel that Providence has delivered exactly the right person to his doorstep. Eleanor was educated back east before her marriage. Writes a beautiful hand and has a head for figures, I'd wager." Eleanor felt a flush of embarrassment mixed with a flicker of hope. "Mrs. Walsh, you cannot possibly know my qualifications." "I saw your handwriting in the guest register," Harriet said with a wink. "A woman notices these things, and you mentioned your father was a schoolmaster." Daniel Swifthorse regarded Eleanor thoughtfully. "I can pay fair wages. The work isn't difficult, but it requires attention to detail. I maintain trading posts along the western routes and supply horses to the army, ranchers, and settlers. The business has grown complex." Eleanor hesitated. Working for a man who was not only a stranger, but also a Comanche would raise eyebrows. She could already imagine Thomas's contemptuous reaction. But Thomas had relinquished any right to influence her decisions. I would need to know more about the position," she said carefully. "Of course," Daniel nodded. "I have an office above Jenkins Mercantile. Perhaps you could come by this afternoon. I'll answer any questions then." After he left, Harriet gave Eleanor an encouraging smile. "Daniel Swifthorse is respected in these parts. Drives the best horseflesh in 3 states and deals more fairly than most white traders. And he's educated too. Went to one of those Indian schools back east, then returned to his people before finding his own path." "I don't know anything." "About horses," Eleanor protested weakly. "You don't need to. You know about words and numbers. The rest you can learn." Harriet patted her arm. "Just consider it. Options aren't exactly abundant for a woman alone." That afternoon, Eleanor found herself climbing the narrow stairs above Jenkins Mercantile. The office at the top was surprisingly orderly. A large desk dominated the room, surrounded by shelves filled with ledgers and correspondence. Maps of various territories hung on the walls, marked with trading routes and notations. Daniel looked up from his papers as she entered. "Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for coming." "Miss Caldwell," Eleanor corrected, surprising herself. I believe I've returned to my maiden name under the circumstances. A flicker of understanding crossed Daniel's face. Miss Caldwell, then, please sit. He gestured to a chair across from his desk. For the next hour, Daniel explained his business operations, a network of horse trading that stretched from the Comanche territories in the west to the Mississippi river ports and army forts throughout the region. He had built his enterprise by carefully navigating both the white man's world of contracts and commerce and the traditional trading practices of his own people. I need someone who can manage correspondence with clients, maintain accurate records, and occasionally translate my thoughts into the formal language white businessmen expect, he explained. In return, I offer $15 a week, which includes a small room above the stables where I keep my stock while in Port Haven. Eleanor calculated quickly. It was a modest sum, but more than fair for the work described, and more importantly, it offered her independence. There would be raised eyebrows and whispers, certainly, but her alternatives were few. Return to her sister in St. Louis and become a dependent relation, or seek marriage to another man who might prove no better than Thomas. When would you require me to begin? She asked. I'll be in Port Haven for 2 weeks before heading west to bring back new stock. You could start tomorrow, learn the systems and manage things here while I'm gone. Eleanor drew a deep breath. I accept your offer, Mr. Swifthorse. Daniel, on one condition. His eyebrow raised slightly. Yes? That you treat me as a capable professional, not as an object of pity. For the first time, a smile transformed Daniel's serious face, revealing unexpected warmth. Miss Caldwell, if there's one thing I've learned in my years bridging two worlds, it's that pity is worthless currency. Respect, however, is invaluable. I offer the latter in abundance. As Eleanor walked back to the boarding house, she felt an unfamiliar lightness. For 7 years she had been Thomas Mitchell's wife, an accessory to his life, valuable only for the domestic comforts she provided and the respectable image she projected. Now she was Eleanor Caldwell again, employed not out of charity but for her actual skills. That evening, as the sun set over the Mississippi, casting long golden reflections across its rippled surface, Eleanor penned another entry in her journal. April 18, 1878. Today I became Eleanor Caldwell again. Tomorrow I begin work for a Comanche horse trader who looked me in the eye when he spoke to me. Perhaps being abandoned was not an ending, but a beginning. Eleanor arrived at Daniel Swifthorse's office early the next morning, determined to prove her worth. She wore her plainest dress, a practical grey cotton with minimal embellishments, and had pulled her hair back in a no-nonsense style. This was not a social call, but the beginning of her new professional life. The office was empty when she arrived, but the door was unlocked. Uncertain what to do, Eleanor took the initiative to familiarize herself with the space. The desk had several stacks of correspondence organized by date, ledgers neatly labeled by year and purpose, and a calendar marked with notations about deliveries, payments, and trading expeditions. She was examining a map of the Western Territories when Daniel entered carrying 2 steaming cups. Coffee, he explained, setting one on the desk near her. Not as good as Mrs. Walsh's, but it helps clear the morning fog. Thank you, Eleanor said, surprised by the gesture. Thomas had never once brought her coffee. Such domestic tasks had been solely her domain. Daniel nodded toward the map she'd been studying. That's where I'll be heading next week. The Comanche bands near the Palo Duro Canyon have been breeding. Exceptional horses, strong, smart animals with stamina that outmatches any eastern stock. Eleanor studied the vast expanse between Port Haven and the territories Daniel indicated. It seems a dangerous journey for one man alone. A slight smile touched his lips. I rarely travel alone. My nephew joins me on most expeditions. He's with our horses at the stables now, and I know the lands and the people. Both are unpredictable, but can be navigated with proper respect. That word again, respect. Eleanor was beginning to understand. It held special significance for Daniel Swift-Horse. "Let me show you the systems I've developed," he said, moving to the desk. The morning passed quickly as Daniel explained his method of record-keeping. Despite his disclaimer about needing help with white man's formal language, Eleanor discovered his business operations were meticulously organized. His handwriting was precise, his accounting exacting, and his correspondence, while sometimes blunt, was always clear. "You seem quite capable of managing these affairs yourself," she observed as midday approached. "I wonder if you truly need an assistant." Daniel leaned back in his chair, regarding her thoughtfully. "Need? Perhaps not. But as my father taught me, a wise man recognizes when another's skills complement his own. Your writing has a grace that mine lacks, and frankly, some of my clients respond better to correspondence that sounds more white," Eleanor supplied. "Conventional," he corrected mildly. "Besides, the business grows. I spend more time on the trail now, and less at this desk. Someone must mind the helm while the captain is away." The word sent an unexpected pang through Eleanor. Captain, just like Thomas. But the comparison ended there. Where Thomas had been controlling and dismissive, Daniel was direct but respectful. Where Thomas had seen her as an appendage to his life, Daniel saw her as a capable contributor to his business. "Now," he said, interrupting her thoughts, "shall we visit the stables? You should understand what it is we're trading beyond ink." On paper, the stables were located at the edge of town, a substantial operation with multiple paddocks and a large barn. As they approached, Eleanor saw a young man of perhaps 18 working with a magnificent chestnut horse in the central corral. He moved with the same deliberate confidence as Daniel, speaking softly to the animal in a language Eleanor didn't recognize. "My nephew, James Swift-Horse," Daniel explained. "His mother, my sister, married a man from the northern Cheyenne. James has her gift with horses." James looked up as they approached, his expression curious as he took in Eleanor's presence. "James, this is Miss Eleanor Caldwell. She'll be managing our office affairs," Daniel said in English, then added something in his native tongue that made the young man nod with understanding. "Good to meet you, Miss Caldwell," James said, his English precise but accented differently than his uncle's. "Uncle says you'll help us navigate the white man's paper trails." Eleanor smiled despite herself. "That seems to be my qualification, yes." James grinned, a flash of youth brightening his serious demeanor. "Then we are fortunate. Uncle's letters sometimes make the army officers scratch their heads." He made a comical gesture of confusion that drew a reluctant chuckle from Daniel. "Show Miss Caldwell the new stock," Daniel directed, changing the subject. "She should understand what we're selling." For the next hour, James led Eleanor through the stables and paddocks, introducing her to the horses with obvious pride. He explained the traits that made each animal valuable, the Arabian influence in one's conformation, the exceptional endurance of another, the gentle temperament that would make a third perfect for a family. Eleanor had never paid much attention to horses beyond their utility for transportation. On the riverboat, her world had been confined to the vessel itself, with animals appearing only when they docked. Now, watching James demonstrate a sorrel mare's responsiveness to subtle commands, she began to appreciate these creatures as Daniel and his nephew saw them, intelligent partners worthy of respect and careful training. Most white buyers, James explained as they watched the mare move in a perfect circle around him, responding to nearly invisible cues, they want to break a horse, to dominate it. They mistake fear for obedience. His face darkened momentarily, like they do with people who are different from them. Eleanor glanced at him, sensing the comment carried personal weight. "And your method is different?" James's expression cleared. We build trust. Show the horse respect, and it will give the same in return. A horse forced to obey will work only as hard as the whip demands. A horse that chooses to partner with you will give its heart. These were not the words of a simple horse trader, Eleanor realized. There was philosophy embedded in the swift horse's approach to their business, one that stood in stark contrast to the relationships she had witnessed among the riverboat captains and their crews, or indeed between Thomas and herself. When they returned to Daniel, he was speaking with a well-dressed man whose bearing suggested a military background. "Colonel Patterson," Daniel was saying, "the 10 horses will be ready for inspection next Wednesday. I assure you they meet all specifications in our contract." The man, Colonel Patterson, frowned slightly. "The fort commander prefers Monday. We have recruits arriving who need mounts immediately." "Monday is not possible," Daniel replied evenly. "The horses require proper preparation for army service. Rushing this process would provide you with inferior mounts, which neither of us wants." The colonel's frown deepened, his gaze sliding to Eleanor with obvious surprise and disapproval. "I see you've hired new help, Swift Horse." "Miss Caldwell manages my business correspondence and accounts," Daniel said, his tone neutral but firm. "Her expertise is considerable." Patterson's assessment of Eleanor was dismissive. "Indeed." He turned back to Daniel. "Tuesday. I cannot wait until Wednesday. The commander is most insistent." Daniel considered for a moment. "Tuesday afternoon. No earlier, and I'll expect the agreed-upon price in full upon delivery." After a tense moment, Patterson nodded curtly. "Tuesday at 2 o'clock. He gave Eleanor another dubious look before departing. "The army," Daniel sighed once the man was out of earshot, "believes punctuality trumps quality. A curious priority. When lives depend on reliable horses." "He seemed displeased with my presence," Eleanor observed. "Patterson disapproves of many things. A Comanche supplying army horses, a white woman working for an Indian, Tuesday instead of Monday." Daniel shrugged. "His approval is irrelevant. His gold, however, is quite relevant to our business." James had moved to join them, leading the sorrel mare. "Will we include Whisper in the army?" Daniel shook his head. "No. She's too good for army work. I have a buyer in mind, a rancher near Springfield with daughters who will appreciate her gentle spirit." As they walked back toward town, Eleanor found herself reflecting on the contrast between her old life and this new one unfolding before her. On the riverboat, everything had revolved around Thomas's schedule, Thomas's business, Thomas's moods. Her role had been to accommodate, to blend into the background, to absorb his frustrations without complaint. Here, within hours of beginning, her employment, Daniel Swift Horse had sought her input on correspondence, explained his business operations as one professional to another, and introduced her to the substance of what they were trading. He had defended her expertise to Colonel Patterson without hesitation. It was a strange feeling, to be seen not as an extension of a man, but as a person with valuable skills in her own right. That evening, after a full day of learning Daniel's filing systems and drafting responses to several business inquiries, Eleanor returned to the River's Rest. Harriet greeted her with characteristic warmth. "Well, how was your first day in the horse trading business?" Eleanor considered the question as she removed her shawl. "Educational," she said finally, "and refreshing." Harriet's knowing smile suggested she understood more than Eleanor had said. Daniel Swift Horse has that effect on people. See them clearly, that one. Later, in her room, Eleanor wrote in her journal, April 19th, 1878. "Today I learned about horses, respect, and the difference between captaining a boat and guiding a business. Daniel Swift Horse is unlike any employer, any man I have known. He speaks to me as if my thoughts have weight." The next week passed in a blur of activity. Eleanor quickly mastered Daniel's filing system and began improving upon it, creating a cross-referencing method that allowed them to track clients, horses, and transactions more efficiently. She drafted letters that maintained Daniel's direct style, but smoothed the edges with diplomatic phrasing that seemed to improve response rates from certain clients. More surprisingly, she found herself drawn to the stables in the evenings, watching James work with the horses and occasionally trying her hand at the grooming tasks he patiently demonstrated. She had never been particularly drawn to animals before, but these intelligent creatures, with their expressive eyes and distinctive personalities, awakened something new in her. "You have a good touch," James told her one evening as she carefully brushed a dappled grey gelding. "Gentle but confident. Horses sense hesitation. They need to know you won't harm them, but also won't be fooled by their tricks." "Rather like people," Eleanor observed. James grinned. "Exactly like people, though horses are usually more honest." As the day of Daniel's departure for the Western Territories approached, Eleanor found herself increasingly anxious about managing the business in his absence. What if Colonel Patterson made more demands? What if new clients arrived with questions she couldn't answer? What if the careful structure of the business fell apart without Daniel's steadying presence? "You're frowning at that ledger as if it contains bad news," Daniel remarked the day before his planned departure. "Is there a problem with the accounts?" Eleanor looked up, embarrassed to be caught in her worrying. "No, the accounts are in perfect order. I was just concerned about maintaining everything properly while you're away." Daniel studied her for a moment, his dark eyes discerning. "You managed a riverboat captain's household and social obligations for years, often while he was indisposed with drink. Yes, I've heard the stories about Captain Mitchell. I suspect you can manage a horse trading office for a few weeks." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, both at the accurate assessment of her former life and at Daniel's evident confidence in her abilities. "Besides," he continued, "James will remain here with the current stock. He knows the business as well as I do, though he prefers horses to paperwork. Between the two of you, I anticipate returning to find everything in better order than I left." "Do you seem very certain of that?" Daniel's expression softened slightly. "Miss Caldwell, in my experience, people rise or fall to the expectations placed upon them. My father expected excellence from his children, and so we strove to achieve it. The army expects subservience from Indians, and often receives exactly that. Your husband expected—" He paused, considering his words. "Decorative compliance from his wife, and because you are honorable, you provided it. I expect competence and initiative from my business associate, and I have seen ample evidence that you possess both in abundance." Eleanor didn't know how to respond to such a forthright assessment. Thomas had never articulated expectations beyond general demands for meals at certain times and a respectable appearance when it suited his purposes. The idea that Daniel had observed her closely enough to form such a specific evaluation was both unsettling and oddly gratifying. "I will do my best not to disappoint your confidence," she said finally. "I'm counting on it," he replied simply. The morning of Daniel's departure dawned clear and cool. Eleanor arrived at the office early to review final instructions, only to find him already there, writing a letter. "Ah, good," he said, looking up as she entered. "I've just finished a note to introduce you to Benjamin Harris at the bank. He handles our accounts and needs to know you're authorized to make deposits and withdrawals in my absence." He handed her the sealed letter. "I've also made a list of expected arrivals and payments." He indicated a document on the desk. Eleanor reviewed the list, noting the precise amounts and dates. "This is very helpful. I'll ensure everything proceeds smoothly." Daniel nodded, then reached into his desk drawer and removed a small wooden box. "This is for emergencies only," he said, placing it before her. It contains $300 in cash and gold. I don't anticipate you'll need it, but unexpected situations arise in this business. The trust implied by this action was not lost on Eleanor. $300 was more money than she had ever been permitted to handle during her marriage. Thomas had given her household funds in small weekly allotments, requiring an accounting of every penny. "I'll guard it carefully," she promised. "I know you will." Daniel rose, gathering his hat and a small travel bag. "I expect to return within 3 weeks, weather and negotiations permitting. James has instructions regarding the care of the horses and the Tuesday delivery to Colonel Patterson." At the door, he paused, looking back at Eleanor seated behind the desk. His desk, now temporarily hers. A smile touched his eyes, though his expression remained serious. "The ledgers and correspondence are in good hands, Miss Caldwell, as is my business." With that, he was gone, his long stride carrying him toward the stables, where James waited with the horses they would ride west. Eleanor sat in the sudden silence of the office, surrounded by the evidence of Daniel Swifthorse's meticulous work and unexpected trust. On the riverboat, she had been an ornament, a convenience, a responsibility. Here, in this small office above a mercantile in a river town, she had become a person worthy of confidence. She opened her journal and wrote, April 26, 1878. "Today, I was entrusted with a business, a strong box, and the freedom to make decisions without a man's oversight. Daniel Swifthorse has departed for the Western Territories, leaving me to manage his affairs as I see fit. I find I am not afraid, but eager to prove worthy of such respect. Perhaps this is what it means to be truly seen." The first few days after Daniel's departure passed without incident. Eleanor settled into a rhythm, arriving at the office early, organizing the day's correspondence, and stopping by the stables in the afternoon to check on James and the horses. The young man proved to be as reliable as his uncle had suggested, managing the animals with quiet competence while offering Eleanor insights into the horse trading business that helped her better understand the correspondence she handled. On Tuesday afternoon, Colonel Patterson arrived precisely at 2 o'clock with 4 uniformed soldiers to inspect and collect the army's horses. Eleanor accompanied James to the paddock where the 10 selected animals had been prepared, their coats gleaming in the spring sunlight. "Miss Caldwell," Patterson acknowledged stiffly, clearly surprised to find her present for the transaction. "I was expecting Mr. Swifthorse." "Daniel Swifthorse is acquiring new stock in the Western Territories," Eleanor replied evenly. "His nephew James has prepared the horses to the specifications in your contract, and I will handle the financial aspects of our transaction." Patterson's expression suggested he found this arrangement highly irregular, but after a moment's hesitation, he turned his attention to the horses. James led each animal out individually, demonstrating its training and responsiveness, while the colonel examined them with critical eyes. "The bay gelding seems smaller than required," Patterson objected after the 6th horse. "The Army standard is 15 hands minimum." James remained calm. "Sergeant Cooper," he called to one of the soldiers, "would you mind standing beside Dakota?" "Here." A burly soldier stepped forward, positioning himself next to the horse in question. "Dakota stands 15.5 hands. James stated. "He appears smaller because his proportions are exceptionally balanced. You'll find his endurance exceeds that of larger mounts, and he requires less feed for the same work." The soldier nodded in agreement. "Fine-looking animal, sir. Reminds me of my father's best cutting horse." Patterson frowned, but moved on. When all 10 horses had been inspected, he reluctantly acknowledged they met the Army's requirements. "The paperwork, then," he said to Eleanor. Inside the small office attached to the stables, Eleanor presented the contract Daniel had prepared before his departure. "You'll find everything in order, Colonel. The agreed sum is $850 for all 10 horses, delivery today, payment due upon inspection and acceptance." Patterson reviewed the document, his frown deepening. I was under the impression we had negotiated 800. Eleanor kept her expression neutral, though internally she bristled at the obvious attempt to renegotiate after the fact. The contract clearly states $850, Colonel. Mr. Swifthorse was quite specific about this figure when you spoke last week. A misunderstanding, perhaps, Patterson suggested, his tone implying that any such misunderstanding was certainly not his fault. Eleanor retrieved the business ledger, opening it to a page marked with a ribbon. Here is the entry from last Wednesday's conversation. Colonel Patterson, 10 horses for Fort Richardson, $85 per horse. Delivery Tuesday, April 30th. The total is $850. She turned the ledger so he could see Daniel's precise handwriting. Patterson's mouth tightened, but he recognized the futility of his position. Very well, $850 it is. He counted out the money, mostly in $20 gold pieces, onto the desk with deliberate slowness. Eleanor verified the amount twice before writing out a receipt. Thank you, Colonel. The Army will find these horses excel in both training and stamina. Mr. Swifthorse selects only the finest stock for military service. Indeed. Patterson pocketed the receipt. When will Swifthorse return? We may require additional mounts next month. Within 3 weeks, though, I'm authorized to negotiate contracts in his absence if the matter is urgent. The Colonel's expression suggested he would rather negotiate with a fence post. It can wait for his return. Good day, Miss Caldwell. After Patterson and his men departed with the horses, James joined Eleanor in the office. His usually serious, face split by a wide grin. Uncle would have enjoyed watching you handle the Colonel, he said. The man tried the same tactic last time, claiming a different price had been agreed upon. Eleanor carefully recorded the transaction in the ledger. I suspected as much. Men like Patterson believe they can intimidate a woman into accepting less than what's due. Not this woman, James observed with newfound respect. Eleanor smiled, despite herself. Perhaps not anymore. The next day brought unexpected visitors to the Swifthorse office, Martha Lewis from the general store and her husband Gerald. Miss Caldwell, Martha greeted her warmly. We heard you've taken up with Daniel Swifthorse's business. What a pleasant surprise to find you still in Port Haven. Before Eleanor could respond to this somewhat loaded statement, Gerald Lewis cleared his throat. We've come on business, actually. Our delivery wagon needs replacing. Axle beyond repair. After 10 years of service, we're hoping to purchase a draft horse suitable for pulling a medium-sized merchandise wagon. Eleanor gestured for them to sit. Mr. Swifthorse has several excellent draft horses in his current stock. What sort of temperament are you looking for? Something spirited or more docile? Gerald looked mildly surprised at her question. I hadn't given it much thought. Strong enough for the work is my main concern. A fair consideration, Eleanor acknowledged, but temperament matters significantly for a delivery horse. They must remain calm around loading noises, stand patiently during deliveries, and navigate town traffic without spooking. She was repeating information she'd gleaned from James over the past week, but delivered it with the confidence of experience. Martha gave her husband a pointed look. She's right, Gerald. Remember how that nervous bay of Johnson nearly trampled Mrs. Fielding last summer when a crate dropped? Gerald nodded reluctantly. A calm disposition would be preferred then. In that case, Eleanor said, pulling out an inventory sheet, I believe we have 2 horses that would suit your needs perfectly. Samson is a Belgian draft, 7 years old with excellent town experience. Or there's Willow, a Percheron Clydesdale. Cross, younger at 5 years, but exceptionally even-tempered. The Belgian would be more expensive, I imagine, Gerald ventured. Yes, Samson is priced at $120, while Willow is $100 even. Both are fair prices for their quality. Perhaps you'd like to visit the stables to meet them. James' swift horse can demonstrate their handling characteristics. An hour later, the Lewises departed, having purchased Willow after seeing how gently the massive mare responded to Martha's tentative pats. Eleanor recorded the sale meticulously, feeling a surge of satisfaction at having completed her first independent transaction. That evening at the River's Rest, Harriet greeted her with raised eyebrows. "Word travels fast in Port Haven. I hear you sold the Lewis family a fine draft horse and stood your ground with Colonel Patterson over the army contract." Eleanor felt a flush of pride. "News certainly circulates quickly here. Small towns run on gossip the way riverboats run on steam," Harriet replied with a wink. "But it's all favorable, my dear. People are saying Daniel Swifthorse knew exactly what he was doing when he hired you." Later that week, a telegram arrived from Daniel, sent from a trading post 3 days' ride to the west. "Negotiations proceeding well. Stop returning with 15 new horses in approximately 2 weeks. Stop how fares the business query Daniel Elena." Composed a reply detailing the successful army delivery and the Lewis sale, keeping it concise to minimize telegraph costs while providing the essential information. As she handed it to the telegraph operator, she reflected on how different this communication felt from any she had exchanged with Thomas during his absences. Daniel's telegram asked about the business they shared, requesting actual information, rather than passive acknowledgement of his own activities. As the second week of Daniel's absence began, Eleanor found herself settling into a comfortable routine. Mornings were devoted to correspondence and bookkeeping in the office, while afternoons often found her at the stables, where James had begun teaching her the basics of horse handling. "You have good instincts," he told her after she successfully led a spirited yearling through a series of basic commands. "You're patient but firm. Horses respect that." "I'm learning from an excellent teacher," Eleanor replied, genuinely appreciative of James's willingness to share his knowledge. The young man had initially seemed reserved around her, but as they worked together, a comfortable camaraderie had developed between them. One rainy afternoon, as they shared coffee in the stable office while waiting for a downpour to ease, James unexpectedly opened up about his background. "My father was Northern Cheyenne," he said, watching the rain lash against the windows. "He met my mother, Uncle Daniel's sister, during a trading gathering. They had 10 good years together before the army decided our band needed to relocate to a reservation hundreds of miles from our traditional hunting grounds." Eleanor sensed there was more to the story, something painful. "What happened?" James's expression darkened. "My father refused to go, said a man doesn't abandon land his ancestors have protected for generations. The soldiers," he paused, "they made an example of him. My mother got me away, brought me to her Comanche relatives. Uncle Daniel was already establishing his business. And then he took us in, taught me his trade." "I'm so sorry about your father," Eleanor said softly. James nodded, accepting her sympathy without comment. After a moment he continued, "Uncle says we must learn to navigate both worlds now, keep our traditions alive while mastering the white man's ways. That's why he built this business. On the reservations, our people are losing their connection to the horses, becoming dependent on government rations. Here, we maintain our heritage while creating something new." Eleanor considered this. "It can't be easy straddling 2 worlds." "No," James agreed, "but the alternative is to lose who we are entirely. Uncle refuses to accept that future." He looked at Eleanor directly. "That's why he hired you, you know. Not just for your skills with letters and numbers, though those are valuable. He saw someone else trying to build a new path without abandoning their true self." The observation struck Eleanor deeply. Was that what she was doing? Building a new path while reclaiming her true self, the self that had been gradually erased during her years as Thomas Mitchell's wife. Before she could pursue this thought further, They were interrupted by the arrival of an unexpected visitor. Through the rain-streaked window, Eleanor saw a riverboat pilot she recognized from her days on the Meridian's Fortune, William Bryce, one of Thomas's occasional drinking companions. "Miss Caldwell!" he exclaimed upon entering the stable office, rain dripping from his oilskin coat. "It is you." Word reached the river that Thomas Mitchell's wife was working for an Indian horse trader, but I could scarcely believe it. Eleanor stiffened at his familiar tone and the implied judgment in his words. "Mr. Bryce, what brings you to our stables on such an inclement day?" If Bryce noticed her coolness, he gave no indication. "The riverman's dream is docked for repairs. Cracked paddle wheel. Captain Donovan sent me to inquire about purchasing a riding horse for his personal use when in port." "I see," Eleanor replied, slipping easily into her professional demeanor. "We have several suitable saddle horses. However, Mr. Swift Horse is currently away acquiring new stock. His nephew, James Swift Horse, handles all demonstrations and training questions." Bryce glanced at James, as if noticing him for the first time, giving him a cursory nod before turning back to Eleanor. "Perhaps we could discuss this over dinner. I'm sure you must miss civilized company and river talk after weeks in this establishment." The condescension in his tone made Eleanor's spine stiffen. "Thank you, but no. My duties here keep me quite occupied. If Captain Donovan is serious about purchasing a horse, I suggest you return tomorrow when the weather is more favorable for a proper demonstration." Bryce frowned, clearly unaccustomed to such direct refusal. "Eleanor," he said, lowering his voice and leaning closer, "Thomas is back on the river. Word is he's taken up with a woman in St. Louis, a widow with money. You can't mean to stay here indefinitely, working for well, you know, it isn't proper." "What isn't proper, Mr. Bryce is discussing my former husband's affairs or presuming to advise me on my own choices," Eleanor replied evenly. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business matters to attend to. Please tell Captain Donovan we welcome his interest in our horses and will be happy to show him our stock at his convenience." After a moment of surprised silence, Bryce retreated, muttering something about women these days as he ducked back into the rain. When he had gone, James gave Eleanor an appraising look. Former husband's affairs? Eleanor realized she had never explicitly explained her situation to James, though Daniel clearly knew the basics. "Thomas Mitchell abandoned me here at Port Haven 3 weeks ago, left me with a note and barely enough money for a few weeks' lodging." James absorbed this information with a slow nod. "A man who would abandon his wife is no true husband, regardless of what papers they signed." The simple statement, delivered without pity but with clear moral certainty, eased something in Eleanor's heart. "That's essentially my conclusion as well." The following days brought more customers, drawn by the growing reputation of Swift horse trading. Eleanor found herself increasingly confident in discussing the merits of different horses and negotiating fair prices. James handled the demonstrations and technical aspects, while she managed the business transactions, creating a partnership that seemed to reassure potential buyers who might otherwise have hesitated to purchase from a Comanche trader. 10 days after Daniel's departure, disaster struck at the river. Heavy spring rains had swollen the Mississippi beyond its banks, and a sudden surge threatened several buildings near the waterfront, including the Jenkins Mercantile below Daniel's office. Eleanor arrived that morning to find water already seeping under the doorway of the shop. Mr. Jenkins and several townsmen were frantically moving merchandise to higher ground. "Miss Caldwell," Jenkins called when he spotted her, "the river's rising fast. You'd best get whatever valuables you can from the office. We're expecting the first floor to flood by afternoon." Eleanor didn't hesitate. She raced up the stairs. to Daniel's office and immediately began gathering the most critical items: the current ledger, the cash box, important contracts, and the correspondence files. She made 3 trips to the stables, where the ground was higher, storing everything in the dry office there. On her final return to the mercantile, she found the water had risen significantly, now ankle-deep on the first floor. Mr. Jenkins was directing the last of his salvage efforts. "Is there anything else I can help you save?" she asked him. Jenkins shook his head grimly. "The heaviest stock will have to take its chances. You've got all your important papers?" "Yes, everything essential is safe at the stables." "Good girl. Now get to higher ground. The river hasn't peaked yet." By nightfall, the lower portion of Port Haven was under 2 feet of water. The river's rest, situated on higher ground, became a refuge for displaced merchants and river workers. Eleanor helped Harriet prepare meals for the sudden influx of guests, all while worrying about the horses in the paddocks near the river. James appeared at the boarding house around midnight, soaked and exhausted, but with good news. "We moved all the horses to the north pasture. It's on higher ground and should stay dry unless the river rises another 6 feet." "Thank God," Eleanor said, pressing a mug of hot coffee into his hands. "And the stable office?" "Dry so far." "You're quick thinking. Saved all the business papers?" He gave her a tired smile. "Uncle Daniel chose well when he hired you." 2 days later, the river finally began to recede, leaving mud and debris in its wake. The Jenkins Mercantile had suffered significant damage to its first floor, but the building itself stood intact. Daniel's office, being on the 2nd floor, had escaped with only minor water damage to some floorboards. As Eleanor and James were assessing the situation, another telegram arrived from Daniel. "Heard about flooding, stop returning. Immediately with new stock, stop. Will arrive within 5 days, stop. Is everyone safe? Query. Danielle." Lena felt a rush of relief at the news of his imminent return, followed by surprise at the strength of her reaction. In just 3 weeks, Daniel Swift Horse had become more than an employer to her. He had become someone whose presence she valued, whose opinion mattered, whose return she anticipated with genuine pleasure. That evening, as she wrote in her journal, Eleanor confronted this realization. May 15th, 1878. Daniel returns within the week. The business has weathered both Colonel Patterson's attempts at manipulation and the Mississippi's spring flooding. I find I am eager for Daniel to see what we have accomplished in his absence, not for praise, though his good opinion has become unexpectedly important to me, but because we share this enterprise now. I'm no longer simply Thomas Mitchell's abandoned wife. I am Eleanor Caldwell, business associate of Daniel Swift Horse, a woman who makes her own way. The river that carried my old life away has failed to wash away this new beginning. 4 days later, Eleanor was reviewing inventory at the stables when James burst in, his usual reserve replaced by barely contained excitement. "They're coming! Uncle Daniel and the new horses. They're just crossing the North Ridge." Eleanor set aside her papers, heart quickening. "Is everything ready? The new paddock is prepared?" James nodded. "All ready. Come see." They walked out to the main road leading into town, where they could see a line of horses descending the distant ridge. At least 15 animals following a single rider. Even at this distance, Eleanor recognized Daniel's straight-backed posture and deliberate guidance of the lead horse. As she watched his approach, Eleanor realized something fundamental had shifted during his absence. When Daniel Swift Horse had left Port Haven, she had been a woman grateful for employment, determined to prove her worth. As he returned, she was someone new, a woman who had faced challenges, made decisions, and discovered capabilities long dormant under the weight of her marriage. For the first time since Thomas had abandoned her on that dock, Eleanor felt truly, completely free. Not because any man had granted her freedom, but because she had claimed it for herself, one day, one decision, one success at a time. And Daniel Swifthorse, with his quiet dignity and unwavering respect, had simply provided the space for her to discover what had been there all along. Daniel Swifthorse guided the procession of horses into the main paddock with practiced ease. 15 new animals followed the lead rope, each one moving with the fluid grace that marked quality stock. Even to Eleanor's still developing eye, these horses were exceptional, finer than the previous group, with alert eyes and powerful builds. James hurried forward to assist, calling greetings in Comanche as he took the lead rope from his uncle. Daniel dismounted in one smooth motion, removing his hat and wiping his brow. The journey had left its mark. His clothes were trail-worn, his face weathered by wind and sun. Yet when he spotted Eleanor standing by the stable entrance, a subtle change came over his expression. "Miss Caldwell," he called, striding toward her, "I'm pleased to see you well. James's telegram mentioned flooding, but said you had secured the business records." "Welcome back, Mr. Swifthorse," Eleanor replied, surprised by the warmth in her own voice. "Yes, we managed to move everything important before the waters rose. The office above Jenkins's suffered only minor damage." Daniel nodded, his dark eyes studying her face with an intensity that might once have made her uncomfortable, but now felt like natural concern. "And you? The river's rest is on higher ground, I believe." "Yes, we remained dry." Harriet opened her doors to those displaced by the flooding. Eleanor gestured toward the horses now being guided into separate pens by James. "Your journey appears to have been successful." A rare smile crossed Daniel's face. "Beyond expectation. The Comanche bands near the Palo Duro had exceptional stock. This season, these are some of the finest horses I've acquired in years." Eleanor found herself returning his smile. "Then our ledgers should reflect a profitable summer ahead." Indeed, Daniel glanced around the stable yard, noting the improvements and organization that had been implemented in his absence. "It seems you've been busy beyond flood preparation, James." "And I established a new inventory system," Eleanor explained, leading Daniel toward the stable office. "We've mapped each paddock and assigned numbers to make record-keeping more efficient. And we completed several sales in your absence, all recorded in the new ledger." Inside the office, Eleanor showed him the innovations she had introduced: color-coded files for different clients, a map of the paddocks with each horse's location clearly marked, and a new ledger system that tracked not only sales but also feeding costs, training progress, and special handling notes for each animal. Daniel listened attentively, asking occasional questions that revealed his quick grasp of the improvements. When she finished her explanation, he nodded slowly. "You've accomplished in 3 weeks what I've been meaning to implement for years," he said, with genuine appreciation in his voice. "These systems will save considerable time and prevent costly oversights." Eleanor felt a flush of pride at his words. During her marriage, Thomas had never once acknowledged her contributions to running their household or managing the social connections that had advanced his career. His rare comments had been criticisms, never recognition. "The business delivered strong results as well," she continued, opening the financial ledger. "The Army contract was fulfilled at full price, despite Colonel Patterson's attempt to negotiate down after the fact. We also sold Willow to the Lewis family and 3 saddle horses to various clients. The total revenue during your absence was $1,070, with expenses of $112 for feed, stable repairs, and telegraph messages." Daniel's eyebrows rose slightly. "Nearly $1,000 net in 3 weeks is exceptional, Miss Caldwell. You have a gift for this business." "James deserves much of the credit," Eleanor insisted. "His knowledge of the horses and his skill in demonstrating their qualities to potential buyers were invaluable." "A successful partnership, then," Daniel observed, his gaze thoughtful. "Which reminds me, We should discuss your compensation. I promised $15 weekly, but given these results and the additional responsibilities you assumed during the flooding, a bonus is clearly warranted." Eleanor started to protest, but Daniel held up a hand. "In business, Miss Caldwell, results merit reward. It's not charity or flattery, simply good practice if one wishes to retain valuable associates." Put that way, Eleanor could hardly object. She nodded her acceptance, and Daniel counted out $60 for her 4 weeks of work, plus an additional $40 as a bonus. "Thank you," she said, the weight of the money in her hand a tangible symbol of her new independence. "I've been saving. To secure more permanent lodging, this will help considerably." Daniel regarded her with interest. "You're planning to remain in Port Haven, then?" The question caught Eleanor by surprise. In the busy weeks of managing the business, she had given little thought to her long-term plans. The idea of returning to St. Louis to live with her sister, her original intention when Thomas abandoned her, now held little appeal. "Yes," she said, realizing the truth of it as she spoke. "Port Haven suits me. I've found purpose here." Something in Daniel's expression softened. "I'm glad to hear it. The Swift Horse Trading Company would be diminished by your departure." That evening at the River's Rest, Harriet commented on Eleanor's unusually bright mood as she helped serve dinner to the remaining flood refugees. "Daniel Swift Horse's return seems to have put a spring in your step," the older woman observed with a knowing glance. Eleanor felt herself flush. "I'm simply pleased that the business operations met with his approval." Harriet murmured, unconvinced. "And I suppose the way you fixed your hair this morning and changed into your blue dress before heading to the stables was also for business purposes." Eleanor began, then stopped, slightly flustered. Had she done that? She had, she realized. Had taken extra care with her appearance without consciously acknowledging why. Harriet patted her arm affectionately. "It's natural, dear. He's a good man, unusual circumstances aside, and a woman can rebuild her life however she chooses, especially one who's worked as hard as you have." Later that night, Eleanor found herself unable to sleep. Harriet's words, echoing in her mind. Was she developing feelings for Daniel Swifthorse? The possibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. Her marriage to Thomas had begun with genuine affection before souring into neglect and eventually abandonment. The idea of risking her heart again, especially with a man whose culture, background and life experience were so different from her own, seemed fraught with potential for pain. And yet, in the 3 weeks she had known him, Daniel had shown her more genuine respect than Thomas had in 7 years of marriage. He valued her mind, appreciated her contributions, and treated her as an equal in their business dealings. But business is not the same as matters of the heart, she reminded herself firmly. Daniel had given no indication that his interest in her extended beyond professional appreciation. Reading more into his correct and respectful behavior would be not only presumptuous, but potentially disastrous for the independence she had only just begun to establish. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at the stables to find Daniel and James examining the new horses in the paddock, deep in conversation in Comanche. They switched to English as she approached. "Miss Caldwell," Daniel greeted her. "James tells me Captain Donovan of the Riverman's Dream expressed interest in purchasing a saddle horse." Eleanor nodded. "His pilot, Mr. Bryce, came to inquire. I suggested he return when you were available to demonstrate the horses properly." A shadow crossed Daniel's face at the mention of Bryce. "James mentioned this Bryce fellow was familiar with your former situation." "He was an associate of Thomas's," Eleanor confirmed, keeping her tone neutral. "His manner was presumptuous." Daniel's expression hardened slightly. "I see. Well, if he returns, I'll handle the matter personally." The protective note in his voice both warmed and unsettled Eleanor. She had spent weeks proving her capability to manage difficult clients. She didn't need Daniel to shield her from unpleasant interactions. "That won't be necessary," she said firmly. "I'm quite capable of maintaining professional boundaries with Mr. Bryce or any other reminder of my past life." Daniel studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Of course, I meant no disrespect to your abilities." The slight tension between them dissipated as they turned to business matters. Daniel wanted to introduce the new horses to potential buyers as quickly as possible, which meant creating promotional materials and sending telegrams to his most reliable clients. Eleanor spent the morning drafting advertisements and notices, while Daniel and James evaluated each new horse's training needs. By midday, they had established a plan for the coming weeks: which horses would be presented to which clients, what training each required, and how they would be priced. The seamless collaboration between the three of them felt natural now, with each contributing their particular expertise to the shared enterprise. As Eleanor prepared to return to the boarding house for the midday meal, Daniel called after her. "Miss Caldwell, I wonder if you might join me for dinner this evening. There's a matter I'd like to discuss away from business hours." Eleanor felt her pulse quicken involuntarily. "Certainly. What time would be convenient?" 7 o'clock? "I could call for you at the River's Rest." "That would be fine," she replied, striving to keep her voice even. "Until this evening, then." As she walked back to the boarding house, Eleanor found herself analyzing Daniel's invitation from every angle. Was this truly a business discussion, or something more personal? His manner had been proper, his tone casual, giving no indication of anything beyond professional courtesy. And yet, the specification of away from business hours suggested a departure from their established pattern. Harriet, of course, immediately detected Eleanor's preoccupation when she returned for lunch. "Something on your mind, dear?" Eleanor hesitated, then decided there was little point in hiding what would soon be obvious anyway. "Daniel has invited me to dinner this evening, to discuss a matter away from business hours," he said. Harriet's eyebrows rose, but she limited her response to, "Is that so? How interesting." Her restraint lasted approximately 5 seconds before she added, "You'll wear the green dress, I think. It brings out your eyes." "Harriet," Eleanor protested, "it's most likely a business discussion that simply requires more privacy than the stable office affords." "Of course it is," Harriet agreed with exaggerated seriousness. "Business matters frequently require candlelight and private dining rooms." Despite her attempts to temper her expectations, Eleanor found herself taking unusual care with her appearance that evening. She did indeed wear the green dress, her finest remaining garment, with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. She arranged her hair in a style more elaborate than her usual practical bun, and even dabbled a tiny amount of rosewater at her wrists, a small luxury she had purchased with her first week's wages. Daniel arrived precisely at 7, dressed in what Eleanor recognized as his business attire for important client meetings, a well-tailored black coat over a crisp white shirt, his long hair neatly tied back. The slight formality of his appearance only increased her curiosity about the evening's purpose. "You look lovely, Miss Caldwell," he said, as she descended the boarding house stairs, the sincerity in his voice causing a warmth to spread through. "Her chest, thank you," she replied, accepting his offered arm as they stepped onto the porch. "Where are we dining?" "The Silver Kettle," Daniel answered, referring to Port Haven's most respectable restaurant. "I've taken the liberty of reserving a private table." Eleanor felt a flutter of nervousness. The Silver Kettle was where river captains entertained important clients and where the town's elite celebrated special occasions. It was also a place where heads would turn at the sight of a white woman dining with a Comanche man, even one. as respected in business circles as Daniel Swift Horse. As if reading her thoughts, Daniel said quietly, "If you would prefer a different establishment, I understand. Port Haven has its share of narrow minds." "The Silver Kettle will be perfect," Eleanor replied firmly. "Let them stare if they wish." She had endured worse than disapproving glances during her years with Thomas. The restaurant was housed in a handsome brick building near the town centre. Its interior was elegant by Port Haven standards. White tablecloths, polished silverware, and actual oil paintings on the walls. The maitre d' showed them to a small private dining room separate from the main restaurant floor, a courtesy that Eleanor suspected was as much about shielding other diners from their uncomfortable presence as it was about providing privacy. Once they were seated and had ordered, Eleanor choosing the trout, Daniel the steak. A moment of awkward silence fell between them. It struck Eleanor that this was the first time they had been truly alone together in a social rather than professional context. "You mentioned a matter to discuss?" she prompted gently. Daniel nodded, his expression turning serious. "Yes, several matters, in fact." He paused, seeming to organize his thoughts. "First, I want to formally offer you a permanent position with Swift Horse Trading. Your contributions over the past month have convinced me that the business would benefit greatly from your continued involvement." Eleanor felt a surge of pleasure at this vote of confidence. "I would be delighted to accept." "Good," Daniel said, a brief smile crossing his face. "The salary would remain at $15 weekly, with quarterly bonuses based on business performance. And he hesitated slightly. "I've been considering expansion." "Expansion?" Eleanor leaned forward with interest. "Yes. Opening a second location in Springfield. It's a larger market, with railroad connections that would allow us to ship horses to eastern buyers without the risks of river transport. James is ready for more responsibility. He could manage the Port Haven operation with occasional supervision, while I establish the Springfield business." "It's an excellent idea," Eleanor said, genuinely impressed by the vision. "The railroad opens possibilities that river trade simply cannot match." Daniel nodded, pleased by her quick understanding. "Exactly. But such an expansion would require additional capital and create more complex business arrangements. I would need a partner I could trust implicitly, someone with both business acumen and personal integrity." His dark eyes met hers directly. "I'm offering you that partnership, Miss Caldwell, not as an employee, but as a true business partner with a 20% ownership stake." Eleanor felt momentarily speechless. The offer was beyond generous. It was life-altering. I don't know what to say. I have no capital to contribute to such a venture." "Your intellect and skills are capital enough," Daniel replied simply. "You've already proven their value." "This is unexpected," Eleanor managed, her mind racing with the implications. "I'm honored by your confidence in me." "There's no need for an immediate answer," Daniel assured her. "Consider it carefully. It would mean dividing your time between Port Haven and Springfield, at least initially." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of their meals. As they ate, Daniel shared more details about his expansion plans, and Eleanor found herself caught up in the exciting possibilities. She offered suggestions about record-keeping systems that could work across 2 locations, and they discussed potential challenges and opportunities with the easy rapport that had developed during their weeks of working together. It was only as dessert arrived, apple tart with fresh cream, that Eleanor realized Daniel had mentioned several matters to discuss, but had so far addressed only the business partnership. "You said there were other things you wanted to talk about," she prompted, curious about what else might be on his mind. Daniel set down his fork, his expression becoming more guarded. "Yes, something more personal nature." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I've received information about your former husband that you should be aware of." Eleanor felt a chill run through her. "Thomas? What about him?" "He's returning to Port Haven," Daniel said quietly. "The Meridian's Fortune is scheduled to dock the day after tomorrow." Eleanor stared at Daniel, the apple tart forgotten. "Thomas is coming here to Port Haven?" The news landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples of confusion through her carefully reconstructed life. "Yes," Daniel confirmed, watching her reaction closely. "I have contacts among the river workers, who keep me informed of boat schedules and cargo. The Meridian's Fortune will dock for 1 day to take on supplies." Eleanor set down her fork, her appetite suddenly gone. "I see. And you believe he knows I'm still here?" "I can't say for certain," Daniel replied cautiously. "But William Bryce served on the Riverman's Dream, which left port 3 days ago. If he mentioned your presence here—" "Then Thomas likely knows," Eleanor finished, her mind racing. What would Thomas do with this information? Would he seek her out, attempt to reassert his claim on her, or simply ignore her existence as he had done by abandoning her? "You're concerned," Daniel observed, his tone gentle. Eleanor drew a deep breath, organizing her thoughts. "Not concerned exactly, more unsettled. I've created a new life here, one I value greatly. Thomas Mitchell has no place in it, yet his reappearance forces me to confront the past in ways I hadn't anticipated." Daniel nodded, understanding in his dark eyes. "If you wish to avoid him entirely, arrangements could be made. Springfield has comfortable accommodations, and I plan to travel there next week to scout locations. You could accompany me until Meridian's Fortune departs." The offer was tempting, a clean escape from an uncomfortable confrontation. Yet something in Eleanor rebelled against the idea of fleeing. "No," she said firmly. "I won't be driven from my home and work by Thomas's presence. That would give him power he doesn't deserve." A flicker of approval crossed Daniel's face. "Then perhaps we should prepare for the possibility of an encounter." "Yes," Eleanor agreed, straightening her shoulders. "But first, I should address your extremely generous business proposal. The two matters may be connected in ways I hadn't considered before." "How so?" Daniel asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Thomas abandoned me without divorce proceedings," Eleanor explained. "Under the law, I remain his wife, and as such, my property and earnings technically belong to him. If I were to become your business partner, he could potentially make legal claims against Swift Horse Trading." Daniel's expression darkened. "I hadn't considered that complication." "Nor had I, until this moment," Eleanor admitted. "My sister wrote suggesting I file for divorce on grounds of abandonment, but I've delayed pursuing it, partly due to cost and partly because it seemed unnecessary while I was merely an employee with modest savings. But as a business partner with significant ownership, it becomes essential," Eleanor finished. "I won't allow Thomas Mitchell to threaten what you've built, Daniel. Before accepting your offer, which I very much want to do, I must resolve my legal ties to Thomas." Daniel considered this, his expression thoughtful. "I know a reputable lawyer in Springfield who has handled delicate matters for me in the past. When Thomas's boat leaves Port Haven, we could travel there together. You begin divorce proceedings, and I investigate business locations." Eleanor nodded, grateful for his practical approach. "That seems wise. In the meantime, I should prepare for Thomas's arrival, if he does seek me out." "You won't face him alone unless you choose to," Daniel said, a protective edge entering his voice. Eleanor felt warmed by his concern, but shook her head slightly. "This is something I must handle myself, Daniel. Not because I doubt your support, but because I need to close this chapter of my life with my own words." Daniel studied her face for a long moment before nodding. "I understand. But know that and James will be nearby if needed." As they left the Silver Kettle, walking back toward the river's rest in the cool spring evening, Eleanor found her mind divided between anticipation of Thomas's arrival and consideration of Daniel's partnership offer. The latter represented everything she had come to value: meaningful work, respect, independence, while the former symbolized all she had left behind. "You've gone quiet," Daniel observed as they approached the boarding house. Eleanor glanced at him, struck anew by the steady, undemanding presence he offered. "I'm contemplating how much can change in a single month. When Thomas left me on that dock, I thought my life was ending. Instead, it was just the beginning." "The Comanche have a saying," Daniel replied. "The wind that knocks you down may also set you on the true path. Not all hardships are curses, just as not all gifts are blessings." They paused at the steps of the boarding house porch. Eleanor turned to face Daniel, wanting to express her gratitude for the evening, for the partnership offer, for his unwavering respect. But the words that came surprised even her. "Whatever happens when Thomas arrives, I want you to know that I accept your partnership offer. We'll address the legal complications as needed, but my decision is made." Daniel's expression softened with genuine pleasure. "I'm honored by your trust, Eleanor." It was the first time he had used her given name, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "Good night, Daniel," she said softly. "Thank you for everything." The next day passed in a blur of activity as Eleanor threw herself into work, partly to prepare for her eventual absence while in Springfield, and partly to keep her mind from dwelling obsessively on Thomas's impending arrival. She organized the new horse's documents, created an improved inventory system for the stable supplies, and drafted advertisements for the Springfield newspapers announcing the planned expansion of swift horse trading. Daniel and James focused on training the new horses, particularly those destined for specialized work, like pulling carriages or carrying inexperienced riders. Eleanor found herself watching them occasionally from the office window, admiring the patience and quiet authority both men displayed with the animals. At midday, James brought her a cup of coffee and leaned against the doorframe, his young face unusually serious. "Uncle says the Meridian's fortune docks tomorrow," he said without preamble. Eleanor nodded, unsurprised that Daniel had informed his nephew of the situation. "Yes, Captain Mitchell returns to Port Haven, however briefly." James studied her with dark eyes so similar to his uncle's. "If he causes trouble, I can ensure his visit is uncomfortable." Despite her anxiety, Eleanor found herself smiling at the protective offer. "That won't be necessary, James, but I appreciate the sentiment." He shrugged, a hint of mischief breaking through his serious demeanor. "The offer stands." One loosened. "Saddle girth or spooked horse can teach a man considerable humility." That evening at the river's rest, Eleanor penned a careful entry in her journal, May 20th, 1878. "Tomorrow, Thomas returns to Port Haven. I find myself strangely calm at the prospect. The woman he abandoned no longer exists. She has been replaced by someone stronger, more certain of her worth. Daniel has offered me a true partnership in his business, an opportunity I never dreamed possible a month ago. Whatever Thomas's purpose in coming, he cannot take this new life from me unless I allow it. I won't." Morning dawned clear and mild, a perfect spring day that belied the tension Eleanor felt as she dressed for work. She chose her blue dress, not out of any desire to impress Thomas, but because its color always gave her confidence. She pinned her hair in a simple but elegant style, and clasped around her neck the small silver pendant her father had given her before his death, a talisman of the independent woman she had been before her marriage and had become again. Daniel was waiting at the stable yard when she arrived, his expression revealing concern despite his attempt at a neutral greeting. "The Meridian's Fortune docked an hour ago," he informed her. "The crew is unloading cargo and taking on supplies. They're expected to depart by sundown." Eleanor nodded, appreciating his directness. "Then we have a day of uncertainty ahead. I suggest we proceed with business as usual. I've prepared the advertisements for Springfield and compiled the inventory." "Reports you requested." Daniel studied her face. "You seem remarkably composed." "I've had a month to rebuild my life after Thomas discarded me without warning," Eleanor replied evenly. "He's already done his worst. What remains is merely conversation." They worked through the morning with no sign of Thomas Mitchell. Eleanor found herself occasionally glancing toward the road that led from the docks, expecting at any moment to see his familiar figure approaching. By midday, she had begun to wonder if he would come at all. Perhaps William Bryce had never mentioned her presence, or perhaps Thomas simply didn't care. Just after 2 o'clock, as Eleanor was reviewing feed orders with James, Daniel appeared. In the stable office doorway, his expression grave. "He's here," he said simply, "at the main paddock." Eleanor set down her papers, her heart suddenly hammering despite her mental preparation. "Alone?" Daniel nodded. "He asked to speak with you. I told him I would see if you were available." The subtle respect in this, asking rather than assuming she would drop everything for Thomas, wasn't lost on Eleanor. "Thank you. I'll see him now." As she moved to leave, Daniel gently touched her arm. "We'll be within sight, but not hearing. Your conversation is private unless you indicate otherwise." Eleanor nodded gratefully and walked toward the main paddock, with measured steps, using the brief journey to compose herself. As she rounded the stable building, she saw him, Thomas Mitchell, standing with his back to her, examining the horses in the paddock with the critical eye of a man accustomed to judging the value of all he surveyed. He turned at the sound of her approach, and Eleanor was struck by how ordinary he appeared. The man who had dominated her life for 7 years, whose moods and demands had shaped her days, seemed smaller somehow. Still handsome in his captain's uniform with its brass buttons catching the sunlight, but diminished in her eyes. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying the same authoritative tone she remembered. "You look well." "Captain Mitchell," she replied coolly, deliberately using his title rather than his given name. "What brings you to Swift Horse Trading?" A flicker of surprise crossed his face at her formality, followed by a frown. "Bryce mentioned you were working here. I found it difficult to believe that my wife would take employment with an Indian trader rather than returning to her sister." As instructed, Eleanor repeated, a note of steel entering her voice. "You left me on a dock with $28 and a note dismissing 7 years of marriage as an arrangement that had run its course. Those weren't instructions, Thomas. They were the actions of a coward." His face darkened at her words. "Watch yourself, Eleanor. I came here out of concern for your welfare and reputation. This situation is inappropriate for a woman of your background." "My welfare and reputation became solely my concern the moment you abandoned me," Eleanor replied evenly. "As for inappropriateness, I find honest work with honorable people far more appropriate than being the neglected wife of a cruel riverboat captain." Thomas stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I have obligations to consider, commitments that require my full attention. I left you funds to return to St. Louis, where you would be properly cared for by your family. Instead, I find you've taken up with savages and are living in a boarding house like some common..." "Careful, Thomas," Eleanor interrupted, her voice deadly quiet. "The next word you speak may determine whether this conversation ends civilly or not." He glared at her, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. "I've secured a position with the Mississippi River Shipping Company, a director's role with considerable influence. There's a house in St. Louis, connections with the right families. If you abandon this foolishness, we could resume our marriage on better terms." The offer stunned Eleanor briefly, not because it tempted her, but because it revealed how completely Thomas misunderstood what had transpired between them. He truly believed he was offering her a privilege, a chance to return to a life she should value above her current circumstances. "No," she said simply. "No?" Thomas repeated, as if the word made no sense coming from her lips. "Eleanor, be reasonable. Whatever grievance you feel over our temporary separation—" "Abandonment," she corrected. "Call it what it was." His jaw tightened. "Whatever you choose to call it, surely you see that your proper place is as my wife, not as some Indian's clerk." "My proper place is where I choose to be," Eleanor replied, finding strength in articulating the conviction that had been building within her for weeks. "And I choose to be here, in Port Haven, working as a business partner to Daniel Swift Horse. I've found respect here, Thomas, something I never received from you." Thomas's face flushed with anger. "Business partner? Has he bedded you as well? Is that the arrangement you've made, your virtue for a pretense at business involvement?" The crude accusation should have wounded her, but Eleanor found herself unmoved by his attempt to shame her. "Daniel Swift Horse has shown me nothing but the highest respect, something you clearly cannot comprehend. He values my mind, my skills, and my contribution to his business. As for arrangements, I'll be filing for divorce as soon as possible." "Divorce?" Thomas scoffed. "On what grounds? I've committed no legal offense against you." "Abandonment is grounds enough in most courts," Eleanor replied calmly. "But if you wish to contest it, I'm certain the river community would be fascinated by Captain Mitchell's sudden departure from Port Haven last month, leaving his wife with nothing but a dismissive note and pocket change." Thomas stared at her, seemingly seeing her clearly for the first time, not as the compliant wife he had abandoned or expected to reclaim, but as a woman who had found her voice and strength. "You've changed," he said finally, an odd note in his voice that might have been grudging respect. "Yes," Eleanor agreed. "Though perhaps more accurately, I've remembered who I was before I subjugated myself to your demands and neglect." They regarded each other in silence for a long moment, former husband and wife, now strangers, connected only by a shared past that looked vastly different from their respective viewpoints. "The Meridian's fortune departs at sunset," Thomas said finally. "I won't be returning to Port Haven in the foreseeable future." "Then I wish you safe passage," Eleanor replied formally. "Goodbye, Thomas." He hesitated, as if expecting her to say more, to plead or negotiate or express some regret for what was ending. When she remained silent, he nodded curtly and turned away, walking back toward the road that led to the docks without looking back. Eleanor stood watching his retreating figure, waiting for some wave of emotion, grief, anger, vindication. Instead, she felt only a profound sense of closure, as if a door had finally shut on a room she had already left behind. She became aware of footsteps approaching from behind, Daniel and James, having kept their distance as promised, but now, coming to ensure she was well. "He's gone?" James asked, eyeing Thomas's departing figure with undisguised dislike. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed. "For good, I believe." Daniel studied her face with concern. "Are you all right?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Yes," she said finally. "Better than all right. I feel unburdened." Daniel nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Such encounters often bring clarity, even when painful." "It wasn't painful," Eleanor realized aloud. "That's what surprises me most. A month ago, his abandonment devastated me. Today, his presence barely touched me." She met Daniel's gaze directly. "I've moved beyond him, beyond that life." A rare, warm smile crossed Daniel's face. "Then perhaps we should celebrate your liberation, the new partnership, the Springfield expansion. There's much to look forward to." James grinned. "I'll fetch a bottle of that Kentucky bourbon Mr. Jenkins keeps for special customers. This calls for a proper toast." As James hurried off, Eleanor found herself standing alone with Daniel in the golden afternoon light, the horses moving peacefully in the paddock beside them. The Meridian's fortune would sail with the sunset, carrying Thomas Mitchell away from Port Haven and from her life permanently. Ahead lay partnership, independence, and possibilities she had never dared imagine a month earlier. "I meant what I said last night," she told Daniel quietly. "Whatever legal complications arise, I'm committed to our partnership." Daniel's expression softened, his dark eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. "As am I. Eleanor, in business and—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "In whatever else may develop between us with time." The implication hung in the air between them, not a declaration, but an acknowledgement of possibility, offered with the same respect he had shown her from their first meeting. Eleanor felt a smile spread across her face. "Time," she agreed. "We have that now." High above them, a hawk circled in the clear blue sky, riding the wind currents with effortless grace. Eleanor watched it for a moment, struck by how it had found freedom not by fighting the wind, but by understanding how to use it to rise higher. The cruel riverboat captain who had abandoned her at port had unwittingly set her on a path to true independence. And the Comanche horse trader who had shown her respect had given her the space to discover her own strength. Together, these forces had transformed her life in ways she could never have anticipated. As James returned with the bourbon and glasses, Eleanor found herself looking not toward the river where Thomas's boat was moored, but toward the western horizon where Springfield and new opportunities awaited. The past was behind her now, truly and finally. Ahead lay a future of her own making, a future bright with promise and partnership and the kind of respect that allows a person to become their truest self. 3 months later, the summer heat lay heavy over Springfield as Eleanor stood in the doorway of the newly established Swift Horse Trading Company office. The brass plaque beside the door gleamed in the morning sunlight. Swift Horse Trading Company, quality horses for discerning buyers, Daniel Swift Horse and Eleanor Caldwell, proprietors. Each time she saw her name engraved beside Daniel's, Eleanor felt a quiet surge of pride. The expansion to Springfield had proceeded more smoothly than they dared hope. Daniel's reputation had preceded them, and several significant clients had already transferred their business to the new location. The proximity to the railroad had opened connections to markets as far east as Chicago and St. Louis, dramatically expanding their potential customer base. Eleanor had thrown herself into establishing the new office with the same meticulous attention to detail she'd shown in Port Haven. The Springfield location was larger, with a proper meeting room for clients and a private office for each of them. The stables, located at the edge of town, were modern and well-constructed, capable of housing twice the number of horses as the Port Haven facility. Behind her, Daniel was reviewing correspondence at his desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. The past 3 months had transformed their working relationship in subtle but meaningful ways. As true partners, they now consulted each other on all significant decisions, their different perspectives creating stronger strategies than either might have devised alone. "The Army contract is confirmed," Daniel announced, looking up from the letter in his hand. "Fort Carson has commissioned 20 cavalry horses to be delivered next month." Eleanor smiled, crossing to his desk. "Excellent news, and perfectly timed. The new stock from the Dakota Territory should arrive next week." "James's first solo acquisition journey," Daniel noted with obvious pride in his nephew. "He's grown remarkably this summer." "He has," Eleanor agreed. James had risen to the challenge of managing the Port Haven operation with impressive skill, sending weekly reports that showed both business acumen and maturing judgment. "Though I suspect he misses your guidance." "Perhaps," Daniel acknowledged, "but true growth requires space to make one's own decisions. James understands this. The Wisdom in these words resonated with Eleanor's own experience. Daniel had given her that same space to contribute, to innovate, to occasionally make mistakes and learn from them, without hovering or undermining her authority. It was so different from Thomas's controlling approach that sometimes she still marveled at her good fortune in finding such a partnership. "Speaking of decisions," Daniel continued, "Judge Wilson's clerk delivered this while you were at the bank." He held out an official-looking envelope. Eleanor took it with slightly trembling fingers, recognizing the court seal. "The divorce decree?" Daniel nodded. "I believe so." She carefully broke the seal and unfolded the document inside, scanning the formal legal language until she found the key passage. "It is hereby ordered and decreed that the bonds of matrimony heretofore existing between Eleanor Caldwell Mitchell and Thomas James Mitchell be dissolved." "It's done," she said softly, a complex mixture of emotions washing through her. "I am legally Eleanor Caldwell again, with all rights to my property and earnings." Daniel watched her face. "Are you all right?" Eleanor considered the question thoughtfully. "Yes, it's strange. I expected to feel more something, triumph perhaps, or relief. Instead, it simply feels like the formal acknowledgement of a truth I've been living for months." Some changes happen in the heart and mind long before they're recognized by law or society, Daniel observed. "Indeed." Eleanor carefully refolded the document. "Still, it resolves the final legal complication to our partnership. My earnings and investment are now indisputably my own." "Perfect timing," Daniel said, pulling another document from his desk drawer. "I've finalized the partnership agreement as we discussed. With your divorce official, we can register it with the county clerk this afternoon." Eleanor took the agreement, reading through terms they had negotiated together over the past months. The document formalized her 20% ownership stake in both locations of Swift Horse Trading, with provisions for profit sharing and decision-making authority clearly outlined. It was fair, comprehensive, and represented a level of professional respect few women in 1878 ever experienced. "I'll sign immediately," she said, reaching for a pen. Daniel held up a hand. "Wait. There's something we should discuss first. Another matter that recent developments have made possible to consider." Something in his tone made Eleanor look up sharply. There was an unusual hesitancy in his manner, a careful choosing of words that suggested significance beyond business matters. "What is it?" she asked. Daniel rose from his desk and moved to stand near the window, gathering his thoughts before turning to face her. "These past months working together have been the most satisfying of my business life. Your intelligence, your dedication, your perspective, they've improved Swift Horse Trading in ways I couldn't have achieved alone." "The feeling is mutual," Eleanor assured him, wondering where this was leading. Daniel nodded, his dark eyes holding hers with uncharacteristic vulnerability. "I've grown to value not just your business contributions, but your companionship as well. Our conversations over dinner, our shared vision for the future, even our occasional disagreements, all have enriched my life immeasurably." Eleanor felt her heart quicken. During their months in Springfield, working closely to establish the new branch, their professional relationship had indeed developed a personal dimension. They had fallen into the habit of dining together most evenings, discussing business but also sharing stories of their different upbringings, debating books they had both read and gradually revealing the experiences that had shaped them. "I've treasured those moments as well," she acknowledged softly. Daniel took a deep breath. "Eleanor, with your divorce final, I find myself hoping our partnership might extend beyond business matters. I would like to court you properly, if you're amenable." Though she had begun to suspect his feelings might be developing in this direction, hearing him express them so directly still caught Eleanor by surprise. She had deliberately avoided examining her own growing attachment too closely, wary of complicating their business relationship or rushing into another entanglement so soon after extracting herself from her marriage. "Daniel," she began carefully, "I value our partnership, both professional and personal, more than I can express. But I've only just regained my independence after 7 years in a marriage that gradually eroded my sense of self. I'm not certain I'm ready to consider another such commitment." To her relief, Daniel showed no sign of offense at her hesitation. "I understand completely," he said, his voice gentle. "Independence once achieved is not something to surrender lightly. I'm not proposing marriage, Eleanor, merely the opportunity to explore what might develop between us without the constraints of pure business propriety. A courtship with no predetermined outcome," Eleanor clarified, finding the concept both novel and appealing. "Exactly," Daniel agreed. "We continue as business partners regardless. I simply wish for the freedom to express my admiration more openly and to discover if what I feel might be reciprocated." A rare smile softened his serious features. In the Comanche tradition, a man demonstrates his worthiness through actions over time, not through a single grand gesture. I would welcome the chance to do so. Eleanor felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. How like Daniel to approach even matters of the heart with straightforward honesty and respect for her position. "I find I'm not opposed to such an arrangement," she admitted, returning his smile. "Though Springfield society may raise eyebrows at a white woman being courted by a Comanche businessman." Daniel's smile widened slightly. "Springfield society has already demonstrated its capacity for adaptation where profitable business relationships are concerned. They may surprise us with their tolerance in personal matters as well." "Perhaps," Eleanor conceded, though she harbored fewer illusions about social acceptance than Daniel's words suggested. Still, she had already defied convention by becoming a business partner to Daniel. Any relationship that developed between them would simply be one more departure from the expected path. And she had long since stopped measuring her choices by others' expectations. "Then you agree?" Daniel asked, a hint of vulnerability showing through his composed exterior. "I do," Eleanor replied, finding certainty in the decision as she spoke it aloud. "Let us see what develops, with no promises beyond honesty and respect." The tension in Daniel's shoulders eased visibly. "I can ask for nothing more." He gestured to the partnership agreement still in her hand. "Shall we make at least our business arrangement official today?" Eleanor smiled and reached for the pen. "Yes, one partnership at a time." Later that afternoon, after registering their business agreement with the county clerk, Daniel and Eleanor walked through Springfield's Central Park. It was a small indulgence they sometimes allowed themselves, a brief respite from the demands of the expanding business. The park was pleasantly busy with families enjoying the shade of mature oak trees that offered some relief from the summer heat. "I received a letter from Harriet Walsh yesterday," Eleanor mentioned as they strolled along the groomed path. "She says Port Haven is buzzing with excitement over the new steamboat service to Memphis. Apparently, the town council is considering improvements to the docks to accommodate larger vessels. Progress comes even to small river ports," Daniel observed. "James mentioned increased traffic has brought more potential customers. He sold 3 carriage horses last week to Memphis merchants visiting on business. He's proving himself an excellent manager," Eleanor said. "Your faith in him was well placed." Daniel nodded, quiet pride evident in his expression. "He has his mother's intelligence and his father's determination. A powerful combination." They walked in comfortable silence for a moment before Eleanor spoke again. "I've been thinking about the Army contract. Colonel Patterson will likely be displeased to learn his negotiation must now include a woman partner." A smile touched Daniel's lips. "Indeed, perhaps we should insist he deal primarily with you this time. It would be educational for him." Eleanor laughed, the sound drawing a curious glance from a passing couple who seemed startled by the easy companionship between a white woman and a Comanche man. "You have a mischievous streak I'm only beginning to discover, Daniel Swifthorse." 1. "Of many aspects of my character I look forward to revealing during our courtship," he replied, his dark eyes warm with affection. The simple statement, delivered without pretense, caused Eleanor's heart to flutter unexpectedly. There was something profoundly appealing about Daniel's direct manner. No games, no manipulation, just honest expression of his thoughts and feelings. As they completed their circuit of the park and headed back toward the business district, Eleanor reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 4 months. From abandoned wife to respected business partner, from dependent spouse to independent woman, from someone defined by her relationship to a man to a person valued for her own capabilities, the transformation seemed almost unbelievable in its scope and speed. Yet it had happened, one decision at a time, one day's work after another, building slowly into a new life that surpassed anything she had imagined possible on that terrible afternoon when Thomas had left her on the Port Haven dock. "You're smiling," Daniel observed as they approached the Swifthorse trading office. "I was just thinking about unexpected journeys," Eleanor replied, "and how the worst moments of our lives can sometimes lead to the best." Daniel's expression grew thoughtful. "There's a Comanche saying, 'The storm that flattens the corn may plant new seeds in its passing.' My father taught me to look for those seeds in every hardship." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Eleanor said. "I wish I could have known him." "He would have approved of you," Daniel said with quiet certainty. "He valued strength of character above all else, and courage, especially the kind that faces fear without denying it exists." Eleanor was touched by the assessment. And what would he have thought of his son taking a white woman as a business partner, and potentially more? Daniel considered this seriously. He lived in a different time, before the reservations changed everything, but he taught me to recognize value wherever it appeared and to honor integrity in any form. A slight smile touched his lips. "He also taught me that a man who finds a woman who challenges his mind while touching his heart should not let conventional thinking stand in his way." They had reached the office door, the brass plaque catching the afternoon sunlight. Eleanor paused, studying their names side by side on the polished metal. "When Thomas left me," she said softly, "I felt as though I'd been erased, as if my value existed only in relation to him. And once he deemed me unnecessary, I simply ceased to matter. I never imagined that within months my name would be on a business plaque, or that I would be considering a relationship based on genuine respect rather than societal expectations." Daniel's expression grew serious. "When my people were forced onto reservations, many believed our way of life, our very identity, had been erased. But I learned that who we are exists beyond external circumstances. It can be suppressed or denied, but never truly destroyed, unless we surrender it willingly." Eleanor nodded, understanding the profound truth in his words. "I surrendered pieces of myself during my marriage, believing that was what a good wife should do. Never again, never again," Daniel agreed, his voice carrying the weight of promise. "Whatever develops between us," Eleanor Caldwell, "will be a joining of strengths, not a surrender of identity." As they entered the office together, Eleanor felt a profound sense of rightness. The path ahead held challenges, certainly. Social, disapproval, business obstacles, the complications of building a relationship across cultural differences. But for the first time in her adult life, she was walking that path on her own terms, beside a man who saw her clearly and valued what he saw. That evening, in her comfortable rooms above the Springfield office, Eleanor wrote in her journal, "August 23, 1878, today marks both an ending and a beginning. The court has officially dissolved my marriage to Thomas, freeing me legally as I had already freed myself in spirit. Daniel and I have registered our business partnership with the county, cementing the professional bond that has brought such unexpected fulfillment to my life. And something new has begun as well, a courtship unlike any I could have imagined. Daniel speaks of demonstrating worthiness through actions over time, a concept so different from the hurried romance that led to my marriage to Thomas. There is something profound in this approach, this careful tending of possibility, this respect for the gradual unfolding of genuine connection. 4 months ago, I stood abandoned on a dock, believing my life had ended. I could not have envisioned that cruel moment would lead to such a profound transformation. The riverboat captain who cast me aside did me an unwitting favor, creating space for me to rediscover the woman I was always meant to be. And the Comanche horse trader who offered employment gave me something far more valuable than wages. He gave me respect, partnership, and the chance to build a life defined by my own choices rather than society's expectations. Whatever the future holds, I face it neither alone nor diminished, but as my truest self, Eleanor Caldwell, business partner, independent woman, and perhaps, in time, something more to Daniel Swift Horse than either of us can yet define. She closed the journal and moved to the window, looking out over Springfield's lamplit streets. Somewhere across town, Daniel would be completing his own evening rituals, reviewing tomorrow's appointments perhaps, or writing to James with business updates and personal encouragement. Tomorrow, they would work side by side again, building their shared enterprise with complementary skills and mutual respect, and perhaps, in the evening, they might continue the courtship he had proposed. A dinner at the new restaurant near the courthouse, a walk in the twilight, a conversation that ventured beyond business into more personal territory. Eleanor smiled at the thought. Their journey had only just begun, and for the first time in her life, she had no map dictating the route, no external expectations limiting the possibilities. There was only the path they would create together, step by step, choice by choice, with the respect that had transformed an abandoned wife into a valued partner as their constant companion. The cruel riverboat captain had unwittingly set her free. The Comanche horse trader had shown her true respect, and Eleanor Caldwell had discovered herself in the space between ending and beginning, stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever adventure awaited. 5 years later, the autumn sunshine filtered through the colorful leaves surrounding the sprawling headquarters of Swift Horse Trading Company. What had begun as a small operation in Port Haven had grown into one of the most respected horse trading businesses in the Midwest, with locations in Springfield, St. Louis, and Kansas City. Eleanor Caldwell Swift Horse stood on the wide porch of the main office, watching as her husband demonstrated a spirited Arabian mare to a wealthy Chicago businessman. Daniel's expertise with horses remained unmatched, his quiet confidence and integrity drawing clients who might once have balked at doing business with a Comanche trader. The gold band on Eleanor's finger caught the sunlight as she adjusted the ledger in her arms. Their marriage 3 years ago had raised eyebrows in Springfield society, but business success had a way of softening social disapproval. These days, invitations to civic functions routinely arrived addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Swift Horse, and, if some doors remained closed to them, neither Eleanor nor Daniel particularly cared. "Mother," a small voice called from inside the office, "Uncle James is on the telephone from St. Louis." Eleanor smiled at her 4-year-old daughter, Sarah, who had inherited her father's dark eyes and her mother's determined spirit. "Thank you, sweetheart. Tell him I'll be right there." As Eleanor moved toward the telephone, she reflected on how much had changed since that fateful day when Thomas Mitchell had abandoned her at Port Haven. What had seemed like the end of her life had instead been the beginning of something far richer than she could have imagined. James had proven himself so capable that Daniel had entrusted him with managing the St. Louis operation 2 years ago. Now 23, he had married a young schoolteacher and was expecting his first child. The Swifthorse family was growing, building a legacy that honored both Daniel's Comanche heritage and the new opportunities of a changing America. James, Eleanor greeted warmly, picking up the telephone receiver. "How are things in St. Louis?" "Thriving," came the reply. "The Army contract is finalized. 30 horses for Fort Leavenworth to be delivered next month. And Margaret sends her love. The doctor says the baby will arrive before Christmas." "Wonderful news on both counts," Eleanor said. "Daniel will be pleased about the contract. He's just finishing with Mr. Beaumont from Chicago. I believe we'll sell that Arabian mare at a handsome profit." After completing the call with James, Eleanor returned to the porch just as Daniel was concluding the sale. The Chicago businessman departed with a satisfied expression, having purchased not only the Arabian mare, but 2 additional horses for his daughter's coming-of-age present. "Another successful negotiation," Eleanor observed as Daniel joined her on the porch, slipping his arm around her waist with easy affection. "He tried to bargain the price down," Daniel replied with a slight smile. "I reminded him that quality commands its true value, no more, no less." Eleanor leaned into his embrace. "A lesson I've learned well from you." Their journey together had not been without challenges. Eleanor's sister had refused to attend their wedding, unable to accept her marriage to a Comanche man. Some business opportunities had been denied them based on prejudice rather than merit. But for every closed door, they had found 2 open ones, building a network of clients, suppliers, and friends who valued integrity over convention. Last year, they had received news of Thomas Mitchell's death, his riverboat caught in a sudden storm on the Mississippi. Eleanor had felt a momentary sadness for the man who had once been part of her life, but no regret for the path she had chosen instead. "Sarah wants to ride Thunder this afternoon," Daniel mentioned, referring to the gentle gelding they had selected for their daughter's first mount. "She's fearless, just like her mother." Eleanor smiled, thinking of how Daniel had patiently taught their daughter to respect horses rather than fear them, just as he had shown Eleanor years ago. "She has your gift with the horses. Yesterday she told me Thunder was sad because he missed his friend who was sold last week." Daniel nodded seriously. "She notices things others miss, a valuable trait in this business and in life." As they stood together, watching the autumn leaves dance across the sprawling property that housed both their business and their home, Eleanor felt a deep contentment. From the ashes of abandonment, she had built a life filled with purpose, respect, and love. That evening, as Daniel read a bedtime story to Sarah, Eleanor took out the old journal she had started in those first difficult days at Port Haven. She rarely writes in it now. Her days were too full with business and family, but occasionally she revisited those early entries to remind herself of how far she had come. The final page held an entry from their wedding day, April 17th, 1880. "Today I became Eleanor Caldwell's swift horse. 3 years ago to the day, Thomas Mitchell abandoned me at Port Haven with nothing but a dismissive note and a handful of coins. I could never have imagined then that his cruelty would lead me to such joy." Daniel says, "There is a Comanche belief that a person's spirit knows its true path, even when the mind cannot see beyond the next step. Perhaps my spirit recognized Daniel from the first, not as a savior, but as a partner who would respect the strength I had yet to discover in myself." The Swift Horse Trading Company now spans 3 locations, with prospects of further expansion. Our partnership, which began in business, has grown to encompass all aspects of life. And while the world may look askance at our union, we stand secure in the knowledge that true value lies not in others' approval, but in the respect and love we share. Eleanor closed the journal as Daniel entered their bedroom, having successfully settled their daughter for the night. "She wanted 3 stories tonight," he said with an indulgent smile. "That child could negotiate with the president himself." "I wonder where she gets that from," Eleanor teased, setting aside the journal. Daniel noticed the familiar leather binding. "Revisiting the past?" "Appreciating the present," Eleanor corrected, rising to join him by the window. Outside, the moon silvered the paddocks where their horses rested, the foundation of the prosperity they now enjoyed. Daniel's arms encircled her from behind, his chin resting lightly on her head. "Any regrets?" Eleanor turned in his embrace to face him, studying the beloved features that had become as familiar to her as her own reflection. The years had added a few lines around his eyes, a touch of silver at his temples, but his gaze still held the same quiet strength that had first earned her trust. "Not one," she answered truthfully. "Thomas Mitchell did me an unwitting favor that day on the dock. He cleared the path for me to find you, and myself." Daniel smiled, the rare, full smile he reserved for her alone. "Then perhaps we should thank him." "I'd rather thank you," Eleanor replied softly, "for seeing value where he saw only burden, for offering respect when I'd forgotten I deserved it." They stood together in the moonlight, business partners, husband and wife, parents, roles they had chosen freely and filled with integrity. Outside their window, the Swift Horse Trading Company's sign creaked gently in the autumn breeze, a testament to what could be built when abandonment became opportunity and respect formed the foundation of both business and love. The cruel riverboat. Captain had cast her aside, but in doing so had set her free. The Comanche horse trader had offered respect, and in the process had helped her reclaim her own worth. And Eleanor Caldwell Swifthorse had transformed from abandoned wife to the architect of her own destiny. A journey that had begun with a single step on a Port Haven dock and had led to a life more fulfilling than she could ever have imagined. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.